Welcome to Goobertown Hobbies. My name is Brent, and today we're painting with friends. I encourage you to grab a soda pop, put some paint on your palette, dip your brush, and join us. Our hobby is fun solo, but sometimes it's nice to have company. I first met my buddy Dave last year when we recorded a game of one-page rules. This year, he invited me up to the MiniWarGaming Bunker in Canada to do a hobby project. We gave ourselves 3 days to hang out and try to make something neat. The MWG Bunker has become one of the pilgrimage sites in our miniatures hobby. It's the modern studio for the MiniWarGaming channel. It's a hive of people playing games and filming them. The upper levels are where the nerds and the games are. Underneath them are the basements and sub-basements. These caverns are home to piles of ancient and storied terrain, as well as tens of thousands of miniatures. To store all the extra nerds, the bunker has themed hotel rooms. Dave put me up in the Imperial Officer Room. The room came with some nice pieces of flair, a comfy bed, and a great little painting desk. I wanted to make a couple of modifications though. When I travel, I like to take a few bits of home with me. We'll just add a few extra lights and a camera. Oh yeah, this hobby desk is shaping up nicely. This is gonna be great. Once I was all settled in, it was time for Dave and I to figure out what we wanted to do. I'm down for almost anything when it comes to hobby projects, but Dave doesn't hobby much these days, so we gotta find something special to get him excited. There's all kinds of inspiration around here. There's lots of mythical gaming history in this place, but there's lots of modern stuff too. One of the newer parts of the bunker is a 3D printer farm. They've been printing prototypes for the next Ravaged Star release. And that gave me an idea. We're gonna work on some Ravaged Star minis, but at a completely different scale. Now, Ravaged Star is a physical product at a 32mm scale, but here at the bunker, we have the sacred STL files and some printers. So this was my chance to see these figures huge. These minis have a ridiculous amount of detail, so I think they'll still look sweet at action figure scale. Dave and I picked out a couple of sci-fi dwarves and 3 alien bugs, and the printers got to work. The plan was to make a diorama. I'd paint the minis, and Dave would dust off his old terrain crafting skills. The purpose of the terrain is to give the minis some context. I'm going to try to make the minis look good, and Dave is going to try to give them a story. We're going to work together on this hobby project to make something cool. We ventured back into the caverns, and I could tell that Dave was starting to get excited. MWG Studios was one of the very first YouTube channels in our niche. They've been around for 15 years. 15 years of gaming and collecting. 15 years of accumulated treasure. Finished terrain, unfinished terrain, famous terrain, broken terrain, and forgotten terrain. Mountains of inspiration. And then it happened. Dave found a starting point, and he began to round stuff up. This is a set of curving stairs carved into rock. This was an old terrain project that had been started, but never finished. A few modifications, like removing the Stormcast statues and the little trees, could make this work with the scale of models that we want to use. We found some more pieces to mash together with this. Some girders, a landing platform, and a radar dish. The dwarves are defending this little technology outpost from the alien Gork dogs. Good enough. The printer was churning along on the last model, so Dave and I declared victory for the day and headed out for some dinner. Day 1 was complete. We had a plan and a bunch of our supplies ready. The last model was printing, and we'll hit it all hard in the morning. When morning came, it was time to start work on some giant minis. These are ordinarily 32mm scale, but the prints are more like 120mm, and I think that's pretty cool. There are tons of neat little details on these figures, and I was excited to dive on in. The dwarf with a minigun is gonna be awesome. I spent about an hour filing off the printer support nubs while Dave ran out to get some sand and glue and other terrain supplies at the hardware store. It really has been a while since Dave has done terrain stuff. Time to prime the models. I brought a good selection of paints with me, and MWG has an airbrushing booth. Unfortunately, within the first 5 minutes of priming, I clogged up the MiniWarGaming airbrush. This is a party foul, a nightmare scenario. That airbrush was looking pristine when I found it, all shiny and chrome, and I went and jammed it right up. I went to the bunker as a guest, and I ruined their airbrush. Luckily, I was able to fix it, but whew, that was a scary situation. I got 2 dwarves and 3 alien gork dogs primed, and I put down 1 base coat color, jade for the dwarfs and red-brown for the monsters. I didn't get too fancy with the airbrush, but I tried to put dark jade on the underside of things and a squirt of bright jade on the top side of things. I sprayed a fleshy transition onto the gork dogs as well. This way we've got a good head start on one of the main colors. Dave was back with terrain supplies, and I was back with the models all prepped and primed. We set up base camp in the middle of one of the big gaming rooms, and we got down to business. We'd given ourselves 3 days to hang out and do this project. Day 1 was orientation and planning. We were on day 2, and it needed to be a big day. On day 3, Brandon the film guy was going to come in and get some glamour shots. So from this point, we had about 24 hours to try to get something glamorous ready for the camera. It's been a while since I've done a 24-hour painting challenge, but I know the routine. Build a nest of productivity, sit there, and start getting stuff done. The key is to keep a brush in your hand at all times and keep on cranking. This is where the buddy system comes in handy. I've got to keep working and keep Dave company so that Dave keeps working and keeps me company so that I can keep on working. I put some teeth and claws on the dogs while Dave did some paper mache to help fit the stairs onto the landing platform. Dave's skills are coming back. We've just got to keep him focused. Once he had made a few structural modifications to the terrain, it was time to repaint it. We headed out by the dumpster in the parking lot to do some priming. For some reason, Dave really wanted to prime with Flex Seal. He thought the rubbery texture plus some sand would look pretty cool. Well, I guess we'll see about that. The hours flew by, and later in the evening, Mike from Epic Duck Studios joined us. Dave and I used the power of friendship to convince Mike to paint the radar dish, and paint it he did. I spent most of the evening working on the space dwarves. I'm loving these things, and they look awesome at this scale. I'm using the Pro Acryl paints that I smuggled across the Canadian border. Recently, I painted some relic blade dwarves with purple and jade. We didn't have time for me to invent a clever new paint scheme, so I'm using purple and jade again on the space dwarves. I also really like the color bronze from Pro Acryl, and that pretty much rounds out the paint scheme. Epic Duck is one of my mini painting heroes, and from him I've learned the joys of black ink. I'm using that to line the armor panels and the borders between most of the major color blocks. Some other guests at the bunker joined in working on their own projects, and we had a lovely evening of hobby time around the big table. And all of a sudden it was past midnight. I decided to get some sleep so that I could come back fresh in the morning. Dave decided to keep working late into the night. He kept going on the terrain, and even did some dry brushing on the gork dog monsters. I caught a few winks up in my room, and then I came back downstairs at 6:30 a.m. on day 3 to get started. The gaming hall was abandoned, except... Aw, look at the sleepy guy. It looks like he made some good progress, but now he's all tuckered out. I grabbed the dwarves and took them back up to my room to work on them during the quiet hours of the morning. They're heading in the right direction, but oh my, there is still so much work to do. No time for dilly-dallying. We've got to get some more paint on these dwarves. Pretty soon Brandon is going to show up with his big cameras, and we've got to try to get something looking a bit better than this. I got some painting done by myself there in the Imperial officers' quarters, and then I headed back downstairs. Dave was awake, and Brandon was ready to do some filming. Dave was back in the zone of dry brushing and stippling. I handed the dwarves over for a few minutes so that he could paint their bases. At one point, we had thought of cutting off the bases and attaching the figures directly to the terrain to make a more immersive diorama. But nah, the bases look good, and they give us more flexibility with what we do with all this stuff after the photo shoot. Dave's terrain was looking nice, and the dwarves were starting to enter the good enough phase. I abandoned my plans to do a bunch of edge highlighting. With the time remaining, I just wanted to clean up the worst of the mistakes. The last thing I did was attach a bullet effect from Deadly Print Studio. I'd never used one of these before, but dang, this looks cool. The flames were a quick airbrush transition of yellow at the muzzle flash to orange to red to black for the smoke. Okay, close enough. Let's pose these models up and see what we've got. We ended up spending almost exactly 24 hours on the hobby side of things, and now it's time to do some photography. We set up some lights and a black backdrop. We posed the minis in the terrain, and we let Brandon get in there with his big camera to work his magic. And here it is, 2 space dwarves and 3 alien monsters fighting over a remote outpost. My favorite part is the dwarf firing the minigun at the leaping monster. They look great together. Those two could have been a tight diorama all on their own. But it's also cool to see how the scene expands outward to encompass more characters and more of the setting. As it is, this is less of a diorama and more of a playset. We've got some action figures, and we can move them around to make them look totally cool. Whatever this is, we whipped it up fast. The past couple of days went by in a blur. We had fun, we finished some abandoned terrain from the basement, and we got Dave to actually pick up a paintbrush. When we came out of our hobby fog, we let Brandon take some glamour shots, and surprise ending, this actually looks pretty good. The mishmash of terrain and figures all kinda fit together, and yeah, I like it. Dave and Brandon are telling their version of this story over on the MiniWarGaming channel. They've got nice cameras and fancy editing, and you should totally go check it out. Thanks to all my Canadian friends who hung out with me during my trip to the bunker. This was a real treat. Alrighty, that's it for this time. Thanks so much for watching.